bringing you a world view.
I like to hear what's going on around the world.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Hey, Pelle.
Roger Gewolb, who's welcome to the show, the frequent commentator with us and in many other places. Roger, what is going on here with Nigel? Has he made his announcement yet?
No, I'm just listening to him. I've just stopped it now so I can speak to you and all of your wonderful listeners. And Richard Tice spoke for quite a while. And then Nigel has been speaking, and it's just all a lot of talk, waiting for them to get to the point. I've put it on hold now whilst I'm with you.
I just got to. My producer said that Nigel is standing as a candidate, so that's the very latest.
All right, it took a long time to get there. I was afraid he was just going to say, "I'll be the leader of the Reform Party," and that's all, because that would have been fairly meaningless. But if he's now said he's standing, that's terrific. That's going to have, as I'm sure you'll agree, tremendous repercussions. Thank you, Kimberly, or whichever producer told us that.
It's Kimberly.
Yeah.
Well,
that's big news. That's big news.
Why is it big news?
If Nigel stands as a candidate, hold on, I'm being deluged with WhatsApp messages here. Let me see if there's anything of any interest. 1 second. It's just going absolutely wild here. Yeah. It's big news because I don't think he will be rejected for the 8th time. I think he will become an MP. He does love this country. He puts it first, and I think that he knows he's needed. I have WhatsApped him several times in the last day or two saying, go ahead. I mean, I'm sure he's had 100,000 WhatsApps, so I'm not even sure he's seen mine. But I think he will, at the least, with Reform, do tremendous damage to both the Conservatives and Labour and all the other small parties. He spent the first part of this talk basically rubbishing Sunak and Starmer as just being devoid of anything, being very much the same, can't even tell them apart. And he's right. They are just dreadful, both of them. Although Starmer actually showed some you-know-whats just now by going against Lammy and those other people and saying, he's going to up the defense budget. Haven't seen anything quite that strong from him before. But I think Nigel and Reform are going to really rubbish them. Because of the first past the post system, I guess you would agree that it's doubtful they would actually be able to win. Nobody can really win except those two parties. But, things are so bad here, Pelle, that you never know.
Yeah. Well, some parties do fall out. I mean, electoral change. The Liberals, of course, that was the last big change. I think, was it in 1906 or something? I mean, they had a huge victory then, and then they faded away after World War I as a Labour Party came on stream. So political change happens even in Britain. And the Tories, I guess, are one of the world's oldest and most successful parties. But even that they can. There was that Canadian example when they went down to 3 seats, and Canada also has a first past the post system. And I don't know if they've recovered since, but they certainly don't seem to have much of a profile. But anyway, that's what the Tories are mentioning.
Canada's a total mess, of course. It's just terrible.
So, I guess everyone's taking out their calculators, and all the electoral analysts are scratching their heads now and trying to work out the different scenarios because the first past the post system, as you know, as many listeners know, it's hard. As you said, you can win up to 20% and get almost no seats, but then if you win 30% or 35%, you can get a lot of seats. So it's not a sort of what's the word? It's not a gradual ascent of seats. It's a discontinuous thing, because you've got to win each individual seat, and you've got to win a majority. So if you have your support is like the Tories win rural seats and Labour wins local urban seats. If the Reform have a approximately equal everywhere, they won't win any seats, even though it all adds up to be quite a high figure. So yeah. So what are your tips of how this is going to play out? It's basically a three-way election now.
Yeah, I guess it will be. There are, I mean, it's just so obvious. There are many who think that poor little Sunak, who is just dying to get his kids into school and himself and his wife to California as fast as possible, will somehow do a deal and bring Nigel and the Reform into the Conservatives. But I mean, why should he? But then he did hand it to them last time and was ill rewarded, was treated terribly. But this time, if it's a takeover, Pelle, rather than a merger, which most mergers are, they are takeovers rather than mergers. If Nigel and his crew could take over the Tory party and save it, well, that would be a very good thing. I mean, that would be an excellent thing.
And that could be a deal that the Tories might accept, if the alternative is extinction. They have no alternative.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they're in so much trouble now. And now that Nigel is back, and I think this strategically is why he did it. I mean, Rishi wrong-footed him the other day by calling this early election, and Nigel has been bleating about the fact that, he was going to run, but with only 6 weeks, there's no way he could put a campaign together. Now, I have been on television program after television program after television program where the question was asked, and not by me, over and over again. So why couldn't he campaign in 6? Everybody knows who he is. What the hell is he talking about? Just go out there and say, I'm up for it. What's he talking about? And I think he was sort of embarrassed, pushed into that by the logic of the fact that, of course, you don't need to campaign. Everyone knows who and what you are, and they want you. And now we got, 4.5 weeks left, I guess. And that's ample time for him to get elected as a simple MP and then head and run his party. And Richard Tice steps aside, and Tice and Bull and Habib all have some supportive roles in the party, but it's Nigel, because anything that Nigel is in, believe me, is all Nigel. His personality and charisma fills up the room. And as Nigel likes to say, I don't do detail. So he needs those people around him to carry everything forward. So I think it could work out very well. And if Sunak has got any brains and the Conservative Party has any desire to stay alive, they really ought to consider doing a deal with him.
Roger, we're just going to go to a quick ad break. We'll be back talking about Nigel Farage, who's thrown a spanner into the or created excitement by deciding to stand. We'll be back after an ad break. This is the Pelle and Neroth Taylor Show. Oh, I just did an announcement to say we're not going to go to break until the half past the hour. Yeah. Do you think that so Nigel may or may not take over the Tory party, but he did say, I don't track it that closely, that he doesn't want to merge, or he wants to displace the Tory party. Do you think, is he really a Tory, or what is his relationship with the Tory party sort of emotionally and technically? I mean, would many Tories, although they've got the gun to their head now and they might accept it, don't they feel that the Tory identity is somewhat different from Nigel Farage's identity? Just like the rhinos in America, and a lot of them hate Trump,
Well, I mean, you've asked a lot of questions in that, but I mean, let me try to answer them all at once if I can. I mean, no, Nigel is not your typical Shires Tory. I think he probably feels rejection by them. He certainly feels those who don't want him. But, this is politics, and they're in dire position. They're in no position to dictate their rather patrician views of people's value at this point. They need to be pragmatic, and Nigel is the guy who can save them. And frankly, I just think that it's very important that they seriously consider doing a deal with him, and not a deal where, we'll let you join us and run alongside us. Because if you do a deal with Nigel, you're going to be running alongside him, mate. And that's what they should do, because frankly, he's really the only personality in the country that could bring the Tory party back to any kind of popularity, because they have just botched so many things over 14 years and put their foot in their mouth every half hour for most of that 14 years. It's just an embarrassment between the sex scandals and the COVID and the one thing after, Nigel can do them some good, and they need to recognize that. He needs to put his feelings aside of how he feels about the past with them, as do they. And it's very simple. And if they don't do that, let me say, they are very stupid.
But have you worked out, perhaps you haven't thought as far as that, the mechanics of this? Would he stand down candidates? Would there be would they just make a deal that in some seats, my people will stand, but we'll call them Tories, and in other seats, your people will stand? And would he be, would you think Nigel's party would have a separate identity, or would it be like a complete merger of identities? I mean,
No,
these are things perhaps, yeah.
No, it would be Nigel's party. I mean, he shouldn't do it on any other terms.
Right.
Trying to work with those people who've ruined everything is just going to give him argument and aggro that he doesn't need. They need to effectively step aside, make nice, and let Nigel and Reform dictate the way forward. It's not a question of stepping aside in seats as he did last time to give it to them. It's a question of Reform putting their candidates in the seats they want them in, and deciding which seats Tory candidates can be in. And anything less than that is probably not worth his doing.
And would Farage call himself the leader of a prospective coalition, or would he displace Sunak?
In other words, yes. I'm sorry to talk over you.
No,
what I'm saying is that, unlike last time, I mean, there's two ways this can go. They can be all fussy and impose these kind of restrictions, which will probably make, and if I were Nigel, should make Nigel walk away, do as much damage as he possibly can in order to win the next election after this one, which was their plan. If, on the other hand, they're sensible and reasonable, they'll do a deal and let Nigel and Reform run most things now, and save themselves, 5 years of misery from Labour.
Right. Well, certainly exciting times. I knew when I was in Brussels, I knew Nigel's right-hand man, because he edited a magazine called The Sprout, which is like Private Eye. I don't know if you heard of him.
Are you talking about Gawain?
Yeah.
Yeah, good guy.
I mean, he was like, we were all pirates, because I mean, nobody would have thought in a million years that these guys, who lugging around copies of a magazine in a van sort of thing, and hated by everyone in the European Parliament, 20 years later, they'd be on the cusp of success and, one of the world's biggest economies. Incredible. Anyway, what I was going to say was, well, I mean, you've met Nigel.
I know Nigel. I've interviewed Nigel. I know Nigel pretty well. Yeah.
Give us a pen portrait. I mean, this is my usual thing. We got a lot of non-Brits and non-Americans here who they have a pretty, I guess they have a pretty negative view of Nigel, at least the bien-pensant in Europe. In Sweden, for instance, you can just imagine, Nigel is only slightly less of a Satan than Donald Trump, sort of thing.
Well, I'm sorry, just checking for any important things that just came in. Well, I think they're all very mistaken on both counts. We don't have a tremendous insight of the Swedish political scene, and they know about as much as we do here. So I would just discount their negative views. I don't pay much attention to that if they don't really, pardon me, know what's going on. All they do is spout what they read in rather biased media publications.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nigel as a person is utterly charming, not a phony. He's quite a bit like Trump, which is why I suppose they get on. Trump is not a politician. With Trump, whom I also know, what you see is what you get. He's straight up, right in your face, tells you just like it is, and utterly charming as well when he wants to be. Both of them very persuasive, very intelligent, very strategic, incredibly impressive, and tremendously resilient people. They are world leaders, that's for sure. They're world leaders. They're of that stature. Nigel, I've been with Nigel. We did an evening in Doncaster in a working man's club to discuss the budget, and there were the main part of the evening was in the bar in the pub afterwards, a few hundred people. And I mean, Nigel just works these rooms. I've never seen anything like it. It's like Trump. He's just there all night till the last person goes home. He's got time to talk to everybody. Everybody feels they've been spoken to individually. You don't get this sleeves rolled up photo op phony nonsense you get from Fishy Rishi, or this just you you're talking to an empty vessel when you speak with Starmer. You don't get any of this professional politician stuff. But Nigel doesn't do detail, so he needs the right crew around him. But he certainly is a leader in the, I could almost say, Churchillian mode, in the sense that he inspires and gives people enthusiasm and confidence. So, yeah, and I mean, and the people in Sweden and the rest of Europe who, what their real agenda is, what they're really saying is they don't like Brexit and they hate him for it. Yeah, okay, well, I mean, 5 minutes after Brexit happened, I was approached by television stations in 3 different countries to talk to them about them exiting next, So it didn't happen yet, but yeah.
No, I mean, I sit and rage at the Swedish political class. They're as incompetent and terrible as the rest of them, really. But the only thing I fear is that the populists won't win as much as everyone expects them to, the far right. But at the European elections, because we've got an ossified political culture, I think all over Europe, people who over-promoted and never really had to struggle. So I'm all on your side on this one. But I just want to say, do you think when Farage see himself as a liaison with Trump? Because one of the things he said, I don't know if it's true. I mean, I don't know if he was being totally honest, but that he wanted to take a step back and sit out this election because he wanted to get close to the Americans somehow and the Trump administration. Relationships between the US and the UK are terrible at the moment. I mean, not only does Cameron was humiliated both by the Democrats and by the Trumpists when he went to Washington last couple of weeks ago and asking for more help for Ukraine. And then people in America, I talked to, this British guy who has his finger on the pulse, a young guy. He says, the Democrats really dislike the Tories as well, and they don't listen to them. So you never hear any talk about the special relationship in the UK media. I mean, discussion of American politics is almost absent. And sometimes the Telegraph is a bit dismissive of the Americans, using the old British arrogance towards them, which to me shows that all is not well in this relationship. And Nigel was going to build it up. He saw it as essential. I guess, do you have any ideas what he was going to do there with the Americans, and if he's going to carry it over into his new role now as a party leader and maybe a Tory leader?
This sounds like most of the Swedes that I talk to. They're generally pretty negative, kind of depressed people sometimes. I mean, they have a pretty glum view of things. You need to change the folks you're talking to. So, for example, a friend of mine who was present at the Trump-Cameron meetings said they went extremely well and they got on very well. Another politician who I won't name said that when Obama came over here and went to number 10 recently to meet with Cameron and Sunak, when he left, he said he had made them his little BI blank blank ES. Okay. I mean, you couldn't be much closer than that.
Right.
It's just not true. The things that you've heard, you're getting the wrong.
No, but that wasn't from the Swedish. I never read the Swedish press for anything. I mean, I don't trust them at all.
Whatever.
But it's actually from
but
the Telegraph.
All I'm trying to say is that Cameron did very well over there. The Ukraine thing, no, because there's a huge number of people that feel had it happened a year ago, it would have been fine. But it's too late for Ukraine to win the war now. That's a separate issue. But the special relationship is still very, very much there. And to answer your original question, Nigel was, and I think still, could be interested in some way, having a closer relationship with Trump and America. There was talk of making him an American citizen and making him American ambassador to Britain. They would never make him British ambassador to America, they said, but it could work the other way around. But I think what's happened here is that he was probably very tempted by such things, or being a trade envoy, but country and duty and patriotism called, and people stopping him in the streets and all the rest, and everybody, including yours truly, sort of bothering him with messages that, I think he just sees how much he needed. The country he belongs to and loves is absolutely going to fall apart in the wrong hands if he doesn't do something.
By the way, the other guy who said that the relations with the Democrats was a guy called Tom Dillon, a young Brit, worked with Boris Johnson. So I thought he's well connected. No,
I'm sorry, I didn't make that point. You're right about the Democrats. He's right. But the Democrats hate anybody that hasn't come up. The Democrats are labor on steroids now. Right. They used to be completely the opposite. The whole party has changed. Their latest thing is to enact a law in Congress that presidents who are in prison cannot have Secret Service protection. Right. That's so that if Trump gets a custodial sentence, he can get bumped off by the other inmates. They really want to get rid of him.
Yeah, and of course we all know what happened to Epstein. The security cameras went off just as he died, and of course,
and you have a New York traffic court judge presiding over the trial of a former American president. The whole thing is a joke. The best one, the one I like the most, I keep saying this I've been on 7 different TV programs the last few days, and I've said this, and nobody knows what I'm talking about, because we don't get the news here in the UK and Europe. They block it. What is the Adult Survivors Act? I don't know. It's an act that was passed by the New York State Legislature exactly 2 years ago. Well, in May, 2 years ago. And it says this: if you were raped or sexually abused 58 years ago and you haven't done anything about it, you're quite clearly barred by the statute of limitations, as you would be here or anywhere else. But hey, you know what? We're going to open it up, and you've got 12 months in which to file that lawsuit civilly now. And it's very clear that all of that was enacted by the legislators in New York State as a state law to enable the dreadful E. Jean Carroll to sue Donald Trump for sexual abuse and defamation 137 years ago.
I mean, I was reading. It's all fixed, and I was reading. I mean, even the CNN's legal and I'm not a CNN fan at all. I despise them, but their analyst said this is a joke case. The conviction,
when
it's
CNN
a zombie
says
case.
When CNN says
legal analysis,
case, it's a joke case.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And the Justice Department decided they didn't prosecute. I mean, it's going to fall apart in the appeal, I think, isn't it? But by then, of course, the BBC and the New York Times blazon their headlines guilty, and of course the European press and the Swedish press that you despise rightly but don't know it, they went to town on this story. When they say the word Trump, they say it's like the old Soviet news announcers. They're all method actors, and Yuri Levitan, I think, was the most famous one, and when he said something, you knew exactly what you had to think of the Western. He said the word capitalism in a certain way, and then you knew you had to hate capitalism. And Swedish news announcers are exactly the same. They say the word Trump in a particular accent, and then you know that he's a really bad man. So, I mean,
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure he'll win the appeal in the New York courts because,
Supreme Court, yeah.
the fix is in. But if he goes to the Supreme Court, my information, my intel is, and a lot of other people's, is that the justices of the Supreme Court, who are not obviously fixable in the way that local elected politicians and, people, they are getting apparently very upset at the way the law and the legal system is being handled at the moment. They don't like this, the Supreme Court justices, and I can understand that. As an American lawyer myself, I am incensed. I am disgusted that the legal system, I'm an officer of the court in America, and the legal system that I worked so hard, studied so hard to become a part of, worked so hard in for so many years, is being hijacked by a bunch of cheap-ass politicians for their own personal agendas. I really hate that and loathe that. And I hope that Trump gets in and, as he said, puts every one of those so-and-sos in jail.
That's right. Okay. Well, I hope so too. Roger Gewolb, thank you very much. Fantastic to have you on. Let's have you on again when Farage, that story develops a little bit more.
Swedish-British journalist, filmmaker, political writer, and author of 5 books, Pelle Neroth Taylor, on today's News Talk, TNT.